views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. For as long as anyone can remember, if a Bronx park found itself in a funding or development battle, you would hear advocates cry, you know, this wouldn't be happening if it was Central Park. And in a way, at the same time that they were bemoaning the anti-Bronx pro-Manhattan prejudice, they were also implicitly acknowledging the excellence of a near 40-year conservancy that has taken the nation's most visited park from days of barren meadows that many of us remember in the 60s and 70s to today's Central Park with its lush green vibrancy filled with activity. This undeniable development is largely due to the support of the Central Park Conservancy that raises a whopping $85 million a year. But now, the Conservancy will be sharing the wealth with a new program supporting urban park organizations in the city and actually across the nation. And they're settling here in the Bronx with the newly formed Van Cortlandt Park Alliance to provide technical expertise to bolster the nation's second largest park in a variety of ways. So that's our program for tonight, the new Central Park Conservancy Institute for Urban Parks and its partnership with the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. Please join me in welcoming Program Manager for the Central Park Conservancy, Salmaan Khan. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
And the co-chair of the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, Carol Samol. Nice to have you with us. Carol, we're going to actually start with Manhattan tonight.
Okay.
It's very rare that we do that.
Appreciate it.
But if you could start with us and just talk about I want to say the nature of the
Sure.
Central Park
Yeah.
Conservancy, but the history of it and what the park was and what I alluded to there and how it brought the park to kind of a new look and a new way that it commands the most visitors of any park in the nation.
Sure, yeah. Central Park has been around obviously for a very long time, and it went through a period of divestment over the course of decades and then reinvestment and divestment from the city. Ultimately, in 1980, a group of community members got together and formed what would ultimately become the Central Park Conservancy. And the idea was to raise funds and do projects that would help to build the park back up to what it was initially intended to be.
Was this based on a model that had been elsewhere, or did the Central Park Conservancy actually invent this concept? Because the words that I've heard from you, I've heard from people of the former, Friends of Van Cortlandt Park and Friends of Pelham Bay Park and all those organizations that really say the same thing.
Yeah. The Conservancy was really one of the first public-private partnerships. The organization started in 1980, but it really sort of set the stage for how this type of organization could work.
So the Central Park Conservancy Institute for Urban Parks, this is kind of a new concept, and I'll just list some of the cities in addition to the Bronx, and I know they're going to do Flushing Meadows Park, Detroit, Baltimore, San Diego, Austin. Just talk to me about the founding of this, and I'm guessing we had it right in terms of you've done so well, why not really let everybody believe in what we believe in?
Yeah. So I work for the Institute for Urban Parks, which is a part of the Conservancy. One of the core tenets of the Conservancy's mission is to help other parks. So the Institute does that by providing programs such as education, capacity building programs, thought leadership events. And this program that we've partnered with the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance on is known as the Partnerships Lab. It's brand new, and the idea is we connect with these organizations for a year, and we work with them collaboratively to achieve a goal that will help them to grow their work.
What's the kind of expertise or the kinds of expertise that you folks have that will be useful, in a way? What have you learned? I mean, the one thing that research has shown, 300 employees as part of the Conservancy. That's
Right.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
We'll get to Ms. Samol and ask her about the,
Sure.
Van Cortlandt Park in comparison, but that's like an extraordinary army of people to take care of any park.
Yeah, I would say that we do have expertise in terms of planning and fundraising and governance, but really what we're working with, there is no formula for how to do this. So we want to collaborate with the folks at the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance and figure out how to help them develop a board governance strategy that'll really be specific to what they need. So it's not us just sort of mimicking what we did, but
Or
working with
saying,
them.
here's the list,
Yeah,
go
right,
do it.
exactly.
Yeah. Last question, and then
Sure.
we'll bring our Bronx friends from the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance in. Let's talk about that fundraising piece.
Sure.
Income and people surrounding Central Park,
Right.
On the east side of Manhattan, on the Fifth Avenue,
Yeah.
and on the west side of Manhattan. There's generally more money out there than there might be maybe surrounding Van Cortlandt Park. How does that work, or how can it work? Maybe we don't need to raise $85 million for Van Cortlandt Park, but we do want to raise tens of millions. How can that concept be applied to a Bronx park?
Yeah, I think part of what we're going to work together to figure out is, what is the goal here? What is the organization's goal? And then sort of backing out from that to figure out who we should reach out to and what kind of leadership they want on the board. So it's a strategy that works from the end goal backwards, and we'll figure out what the best way to do this is with the group.
All right, Ms. Samol, let's talk a little bit about our home, Van Cortlandt Park. So why don't we rewind the clock just a little bit and talk about how we got an alliance from these two organizations, the Van Cortlandt Park Conservancy, I guess it was, and the Friends of Van Cortlandt Park, and then they merged to form it. Talk about the concept, and then we'll go from there and bring those guys in.
Yeah, so those two organizations, the Friends and the Conservancy, existed for many years. The Friends was around for 25 plus years now. But we both, did similar work in the park, working with youth, working to maintain parts of the park.
Now, you had been part of one of those organizations?
Yes, I was on the Friends of Van Cortlandt Park for several years. And we just came to realize that we both had this ambition to be bigger, better stewards for the park. And to do that, we knew we needed to join forces. That was very clear from funders, from the public, from the Parks Department. Everybody said, you all should join forces.
If I can just interject for a second, as you know, I've been around a long time, and Van Cortlandt Park has been my home park. It never actually occurred to me. I was always aware that there were these two organizations, but then when it was put to me that, hey, we're going to get together, I was like, yeah, what is that about? Why did we have, not that I want to rewind the clock and ask about that, but you're right, it didn't seem to make any sense. You're competing for the same dollars.
That's right.
You have the same goals.
That's right. That's right. And we could do more together, better. And we knew we could be a better stewardship organization. We know we need to raise millions of dollars to achieve the master plan, which is our kind of our touchstone, our goal to implement the master plan. But also just for the maintenance of the park. And that's what we did. It took us several years to come to the terms of the agreement. We both wanted to preserve the best parts of the organizations. And this spring, we signed the agreement and launched the alliance, the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. And at the start, we had 5 members from the Friends Board, 5 members from the Conservancy Board, and 3 new members. We had a starter board, and we launched with that. We're very fortunate to have the Central Park Conservancy assistance coming in at this time. It's perfect timing for us.
Was this a situation where you said, gee, maybe we could partner with them? Like, who came to who first?
Well, they had an application process.
Right, I'm going to ask them about that as well.
We also had on our kind of a small advisory board when we were looking at the merger, staff representation from the Central Park Conservancy. They were friends. They knew us. They knew what we wanted to achieve and could guide us. We had a lot of people on that kind of advisory group to roll up our sleeves and get that done.
When you look at, because frankly, Mr. Khan was a little bit vague on what exactly they're going to do, but when you look
Yeah.
at the potential here, how do you see it? I mean, my thought right away, of course, is funding. The city never seems to have enough money for parks. We know that. So funding has got to be in there. But what kinds of things are you going to say when you get to sit around the table? Let's try this. What is it that you think they can help with?
Well, I think they can help us put together a plan to grow the organization with strategic priorities for the park, for fundraising, for capital investments, to grow our board, to make sure our board is diverse and can provide the governance that we need. That's the board's role. We're already committed to. We're continuing the programs both organizations had. We maintain the trails in the park. We have educators come into the park, students, youth every summer come in to learn about the biology of the park and the ecology of the park and to help maintain the park. Learning about invasive species and actually doing that kind of work. So that kind of programming. But we also want to bring in more cultural events. We want to bring in other activities. We want to target our investments in the capital needs. And like I said, the master plan is a really important starting point for that.
Well, just listening to what you're saying, and of course you say to me, or of course to many people in the Bronx, Van Cortlandt Park, and we're showing some of the activities on the screen now. There are many activities that it's a huge park, and whether it be the lake or whether it be the cross country trail. I mean, we all have the parade grounds. It goes on and on and on. And that's my first thought. But the first thing you had said was really administratively to put the boards together.
That's right.
That to me is fascinating because I think people who use the park, like we all do, don't think of those things.
Yeah.
And yet, you're identifying that as something that is kind of crucial to moving to the next step.
It's key, I think, to keep the organization strong and going in the right direction. It took us a long time to come to the merger, but we still have a lot of hard work ahead of us in growing the organization. And we want to grow staff, we want to grow the board, we want to raise funds.
Mr. Khan, just taking a step back to the application process, do we know how many parks actually applied? And then, of course, my interest would be what was it that made Van Cortlandt Park distinctive?
Yeah, we had dozens of applications that came in. The reason we selected Van Cortlandt was they had a very, very clear goal for what they were looking to do. I think a strong board provides a really strong foundation for an organization moving forward. So that was really their focus. And their commitment to the community has been decades that they've been doing this work. So they made a really compelling case for themselves, and we were thrilled to be participating in this project.
Of course, given the program that we have here and what we normally do, the notion of commitment to the community is really a very interesting one. How is that measured? And I hate to ask this because we have many friends at Pelham Bay Park and all the other parks. They're all committed to the. I mean, we did a show on local on small parks, and boy, you couldn't be more committed to the community. So how do you measure that, and what made has happened at Van Cortlandt Park again distinctive?
Sure, I think one of the obvious things is duration. They've remained a part of the community for a very, very long time, and I think the merger of the two organizations really showed that they were being strategic about how they could best serve the community. They were doing something that was really forward-thinking, and we felt that was a very compelling argument to make.
Did you think that the alliance notion was an important? I guess you would have had to think that. Wow, finally they came together. This is a good time for us to get involved. I think the timing.
The timing was really perfect. I mean, it couldn't have been better. So their application was so strong for a million reasons, but the timing they made a great case for themselves.
If you, I don't know if you can look at time, how long it will take. I mean, I guess we're all into new territory here. Give me a vision for the future because really Van Cortlandt Park, I got to tell you, it's doing real well. I mean, we have the controversy over the Putnam Trail. We know we have that. There's certainly the daylighting at Tippett's Brook Park. These are all very, very big issues. I don't know. I go out there on a Saturday or Sunday. I see people playing cricket. I see people playing ball. I see the lake has got boating events. I mean, what would we look for so that people in the Bronx would say, oh, this was a good thing?
Sure. I think the timing question is a good one, and really what the Partnerships Lab seeks to do is strengthen an organization. So you may not see an immediate change in months.
Rats.
But yeah, I know. But over the long term, the idea is that we want to provide this organization with the strength that it needs to grow for decades to come. So that's really the focus here is long-term growth.
Ms. Samol, I wanted to ask you about, because I mentioned that they've, listen, Central Park gets 42 million visitors a year, which is like kind of unbelievable. What are some of the numbers about, and they have the 300 staff members, what are some of the numbers out there for Van Cortlandt Park that people would find significant? I mean, park is busy. I got to tell you, I just try to get there on a Saturday morning when it's cross-country day. There are buses and there's schools from all over the country, literally.
Well, it's the third largest park in the city.
Yes.
And it's right here in the Bronx at the end of, subway lines. You could take the subway to the park even if you don't live in the neighborhood. So it's a regional draw too. Draws from the entire borough. We want it to be more than that. We're a small organization right now still. We have fewer than, 8 full-time.
8 full-time
Yeah,
employees.
I mean, it's small. We're small.
Well,
when
you're
we join.
292 short, I guess.
But we also, what Central Park does that I think we would ultimately want to grow to is, they have a lot of maintenance staff. They have other people who are actually working in the park itself. And right now we're relying on parks employees to do that. We'd like to supplement that. So that's one thing. We serve together about 7,500 students, teachers, adults, people who come into the park. We offer classroom experiences. We have students coming in, teachers learning how, using the park as a science lab. We offer.
And you think those things might be expanded, include, for example, more schools or things like that?
Sure. We're committed to the environmental programming, to the historic aspects of the park, and the ecology of the park. Those are the things that we want to focus on. Those are big, but we want to grow this. I want to say we have in the park more than 1 million visitors a year.
Wow.
But it could be more. We're the third largest park, and we have a lot of things happening there.
I don't want to belittle our friends at Central Park, but they only have 843 acres, and Van Cortlandt Park has 1,146 acres. But what that underscores is look at the size of the management team by an independent body compared to your management team, which lets us ask you the question, so what do all those employees specifically do?
Yeah.
And because now, we're hearing that they have some ideas about, wow, if we had more managers or more people operating, what could, if they do build their staff and their board and all that, what could they ultimately do?
As Carol alluded to, there's a great operations staff at Central Park. There's also development and fundraising. There's planning, design, and construction to do capital projects in the park. There's a great team of visitors, visitor experience folks in the park that help visitors. So there's a lot of different components of a great public space organization that I think Van Cortlandt could grow into in the future.
I want to ask you, not necessarily about the ultimate decision. I mentioned the Putnam Trail and all that kind of a thing. When these kinds of things come up in Central Park, I guess here in the Bronx, we think we're the only ones. We're going to pave a trail. Some people like it, some people don't like it. They don't like the materials. They want different materials. This is not the show for that. But what role does the Conservancy play in those things? And then what role ultimately could the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, or no role? And you say it's not going to get involved because it's going to be the parks and the EIS and all that other stuff. Yeah. So how do you folks deal? And in Central Park, I'm sure that everybody's got an idea. Hey, let's take this piece of land and do something with it.
Yeah, the Conservancy works very closely with the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, as would the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. But there's a great team of planning and design folks at the organization that works with the Parks Department to do these projects.
But in terms of the decision making, or do they get involved, take a position, or sometimes yes, sometimes no?
Yeah, it sort of depends on what the issue is and what the project is. Sometimes the Parks Department takes the lead, sometimes it's Conservancy, but it's always collaborative.
And so then let's ask you. You know a lot about these kinds of projects. What role does or should the Alliance take as somebody looks at the park and says, "Hey, we want to do this," or maybe on Vault Hill we want to do more with those historic grave sites which have been sitting up there. That would be my first thought anyway, as somebody who's interested in Bronx history.
Yeah, I mean, it's a public park, and we want it to remain a public park, and it is a public good. And so the Department of Parks and Recreation is just our significant partner.
Steward, maybe?
Yes, yes. I mean, we have to work collaboratively with them. Iris Rodriguez-Rosa is a member of our board and has been a really incredible supporter of this whole process. She wants to see us succeed. I think that'll be a really important part of it. Ultimately, we want to be able to take on a lot more projects to get them done more quickly, I think a little more efficiently. That will take time. We would have to raise funds for that.
There's that huge project going on Broadway right now.
That's right.
Which maybe people aren't aware of it, so why don't we
Yeah.
break away from the internal discussion here. Talk about that project. I think people go by on Broadway or what's going on over here. Why don't we talk about that? Because that's kind of an exciting thing. It's a gateway thing, right?
That's right. There are, we just got a report last night from the commissioner at our board meeting. There are more than $30 million worth of capital projects either in construction or in planning phases or design phases.
In the park?
In the park.
Wow.
That's amazing. One of them is at the Broadway and 242nd Street entrance, and that was the Parks Without Border initiative that the park won. There was a citywide competition for this kind of funding, and
Sounds like you won the other one too.
Yeah.
That's good.
So
Speaks well
effective
for Van Cortlandt
advocates,
Park.
yeah, the community won, and it will be the idea is to break down the barriers to make the park feel inviting and open and.
And so what's actually going to be there? I mean, the handball courts, frankly, are legendary, and it doesn't look like, I don't know if they're going to be touched or improved. And what do we used to have? An ice skating rink there. We had tennis courts there. What are we going to get?
Well, we'll still have we'll have seating and new plantings. I think just more gathering space, signage. Certainly, we want to add to the park. We also have another playground that's going in that location. So there's a lot even more than the scope of the Parks Without Borders entryway.
That's pretty exciting.
It is. It is.
And really, to me, parks are understood in our city and the importance of them. Talk to me, Mr. Khan, about what you and your colleagues will have to learn in order to really, because you talked about, it's going to be a process.
Yeah.
So what kind of benchmarks are you going to look for from the folks at Van Cortlandt Park?
Yeah, so the way the project will work is we have a kickoff meeting with them to sort of really understand. They're the experts on the community. They know the park. They know the issues, and we want to work with them to figure out and understand what those things are, and then set a schedule for what the final deliverables are, what's going to be most useful for them, and then set a plan, a project plan to do those
I'm
things.
just curious. It's not directly related to us here in the borough of the Bronx. So now Flushing Meadow Park is also on the list, and then there are parks in Detroit and Baltimore and San Diego and Austin. It's a pretty large, scope. Talk to me about is there a difference between the way you might approach, for example, a park in Baltimore or San Diego versus here, or is there really kind of a formula? We're just going to handle it, this way.
Yeah, each partnership is completely unique because each park and public space has its own unique challenges. In New York, it's the Gowanus Canal Conservancy, Flushing Meadows, and Van Cortlandt. And each of those projects will be treated independently based on what it is they're looking for, what the community looks like, and what they need. So it's a completely unique partnership.
You and your colleagues must be incredibly excited about it because here you are, you've got, listen, let's be honest, maybe the most famous park in the world, Central Park. And you've done very well, and I alluded to it at the top of the show. I remember going to concerts on the Sheep Meadow, and it was brown. I mean, there was no grass, and we all enjoyed ourselves. But and I remember there was that effort ultimately to replant the Sheep Meadow. And now, if you walk through Central Park, it's really just gorgeous. So this must be exciting to take what you've done and say, wow, we can. Make a change.
Yeah, we're thrilled. I mean, again, the sort of timing with the partnership with the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance is really exciting for us, and frankly, we have a lot to learn. We're looking forward to collaborating, and every time we do a project with a partner, we learn something more that we can then take to somebody else and do other projects. So this is great.
And so, in a way, a similar question for Van Cortlandt Park. What is it that you have done? In other words, if you say to them, hey, we've got our forestry center, or we've done all these programs and things like that. To me, programming is a very big aspect of, number one, what you do and what you could continue to do, given the resources in the park. With you have a lake and you got all the ball fields and certainly cross-country track and forestry areas. So talk to me a little bit about program. You've suggested it, but I want to get into it a little more because that's what people in the Bronx want to know about.
Well, that's why I got involved with the park. We together bring in youth to learn about the ecology and biology of the park firsthand, getting their hands dirty, quite literally, working with invasive species, maintaining, going into the water, into the lake and removing things. So they're really learning about biology and ecology firsthand, directly in the park. They help maintain the trails. That is, we see some of those young people from the Bronx go on to, college thinking that this is what I want to do. I want to work in ecology. I want to work in
We've seen that happen.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
That young people are inspired by it.
And the other aspects of the programming, we have a youth farmers market where they learn a little bit about commerce, but also fresh foods and
I have actually bought Bronx hot sauce from those farmers markets, I can tell you.
Yeah. We have cultural events like dancing in the park, barefoot dancing in the park. That will continue to, the park has a lot of other resources. We've got, you've mentioned them, Gary. Ball fields, cricket fields. We have more than 25 miles of hiking trails.
And that lake, I think that lake. Listen, they did a great job. People don't know, but I remember ice skating on that lake. But that's a climate thing that we're not going to talk about right now. But they dredged the lake and they brought it back to life. I mean, there's so much potential here. So let's wrap it up, Mr. Khan. What's specifically next? A big meeting and you get together and sit around a big table? Or
actually, that's more or less it. It's a project management thing, and we're going to have a meeting with board members and our staff and sort of just hash out what this is going to look like, figure out what we need to do, and take it from there.
It's really, to me, very exciting because given the resources at Central Park, we talked about the funders that literally live all around it. But to use that and then really potentially make a change even nationwide in urban parks, and they're so important. You're excited?
Absolutely. Everyone on the board is very excited.
Great.
Yeah,
thank you so much,
Thank you so much.
Salmaan Khan from Central Park Conservancy, and I guess it's actually called the Urban Land Institute?
Institute for Urban Parks.
Institute for Urban Parks. Want to get that right? And Carol Samol, congratulations on the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance. Makes a lot of sense. I don't know what we were waiting for, but we got it done. And the future is now for Van Cortlandt Park. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You can send us a tweet at BronxTalk, or you post them on our Facebook page. Now, they'll be interested in this. Next week, we'll get into a proposal to overhaul the energy systems that serve the Hunts Point Cooperative Food Market and local communities in that area with green technology that would literally mean an environmental sea change in one of the most polluted sections of the Bronx. It's a wonderful proposal. It's fascinating. It's going to take a while to get there, but we're going to present it so people can start dreaming about the good things in the Bronx. We thank our producer, Helen Greenberg, our director, Nick Marrero, and our cast of thousands around us. We'll see you next week. Good night.